Hello to you all. This is Gary Grant. I'm a barrister specialising in alcohol licensing law, and I practice from the chambers at Francis Taylor Building in the Inner Temple, London. Today I want to talk to you about licensing in the time of coronavirus, and in particular the challenges but also the opportunities for the gin industry during the current pandemic and afterwards. You cannot fail to have noticed the impact on the alcohol and licensed leisure and hospitality industry caused by COVID-19. Pubs, restaurants closed, the nighttime economy on its knees. But this too will pass and we will bounce back. Only 2 days ago, the Shakespeare's Globe announced that it may fall into insolvency unless there's a rapid cash input. Well, we've been here before. Going back 400 years to the plague outbreak in London in 1606. Well, Shakespeare's original Globe had to shut down while the plague ravaged London. We can go forward to the Spanish flu in November 1918. Have a look at this public notice. And this is actually a Canadian notice, but see if you recognise some echoes of today. It says, "Notice is hereby given that in order to prevent the spread of Spanish influenza, all schools, public and private, churches, theatres, moving picture halls, pool rooms, and other places of amusement and lodge meetings are to be closed until further notice. All public gatherings consisting of 10 or more are prohibited." There's nothing new under the sun. The approach of all of us in the alcohol licensing industry has to be to adopt the proverb that hung over Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's desk. Quiet, calm deliberation disentangles every knot. Now we'll put aside the fact that he pinched that straight from Gilbert O'Sullivan, The Gondoliers. It contains a great deal of useful wisdom to how to approach crisis such as ours. Of course, gin and alcohol and crisis is nothing new. Going back to the gin craze of the 18th century, and I'm sorry to have to bring it up in this esteemed company, but of course it was the gin craze that gave rise to the first alcohol licensing laws, and for that I have to thank you for my profession. The gin craze, of course, was the wholly unregulated control and supply of alcohol. And when it's wholly unregulated, problems will of course arise. We should perhaps put aside Hogarth's sister engraving done at the same time as Gin Lane. That was Beer Street, and he was trying to make the point that if only we stuck to beer instead of that European stuff, well, everything would be happy and sun would shine and the joys would flow from every quarter. There's been varying different perspectives on alcohol and society from our great writers, thinkers and politicians. Winston Churchill had this to say: "My rule of life, prescribed as an absolutely sacred right, smoking cigars and also the drinking of alcohol before, after, and if need be, during all meals and in the intervals between them." He sent that as a telex to the King of Saudi Arabia when he was due to meet him after the Yalta conference at the end of the war. He also said, near the end of his life, to his doctor, Lord Moran, "I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has ever taken out of me." His longtime protagonist, George Bernard Shaw, I think both of them were vying to be the wittiest man in England, had a very different approach to alcohol. He called it the anaesthesia by which we endure the operation of life. Now, all these varying perceptions on alcohol led the government in 2003 to pass the Licensing Act, and that controls all forms of supply of retail alcohol. It covers the retail sale of alcohol both on and off premises, and that includes online as well as mobile sales. It also happens to cover regulated entertainment, so live and recorded music, dance, theatre, films, indoor sports and so on, as well as late night refreshment, which is simply hot food and hot drink between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. Now, gin, of course, to your credit, has had a resurgence in recent years. You can find specialist gin parlours popping up all over London and the rest of the UK, as well as, importantly, distilleries with tap rooms in which they can provide alcohol to members of the public or turn up, but also to deliver straight from source to people's homes. In all these cases, a premises licence under the Licensing Act is required. Now, all that's well and good, save for what happened on the 20th of March 2020. That's when the Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the closure of all pubs, restaurants, bars and other non-essential premises. That led in turn the following day, the 21st of March, to a series of regulations which formally and legally closed those premises. And they're up on screen now. 21st of March regulations were shortly replaced 5 days later by even more expansive regulations that included the personal restrictions on movement as well as the closure of business. Now, to summarise the regulations and the closure provisions, there's much more detail in the slides that have been published than I'm going to deal with today in this presentation. But simply note this, that the closure of alcohol premises is only for alcohol to be consumed on the premises itself during the emergency period, which at the moment is 6 months, but that's a reviewable period, and indeed it has to be reviewed at least every 21 days by the Secretary of State for Health. And that, of course, closes bars, pubs and restaurants, but only insofar as it's for consumption of food and drink on those premises. The regulations do not prohibit off-sales of alcohol and food, such as takeaway or delivery of alcohol services. And indeed, there are a number of distilleries which formerly have bottle rooms or tap rooms which hold a premises licence, which are delivering alcohol and are permitted to do so with a premises licence straight to the customer's home. There are certain exemptions to these lockdown provisions, including work and hospital canteens and hotel room service. How are they enforced? Well, the answer is it's a criminal offence to break the lockdown regulations, and enforcement is being carried out both by police as well as by local authority council officers. There is guidance issued by the government. You'll find a link to that guidance on screen now. But do remember this, guidance is not law. Only the regulations are the law. So how is this providing opportunities for gin-based businesses? Well, the answer is this, that even now, the licensing processes remain open and working, albeit a little slower than usual. The licensing processes, by which I mean applications to your local authority for a premises license, a new one that permits the sale by retail of alcohol, or to vary existing licenses you may have. Those processes are still up and going. You might be considering future developments, a future distillery which you want to serve the public in. Now is a good time to do that. You might be considering, if you have licenses at the moment, to apply for longer operating hours or refurbishments of your premises. That requires a license variation. Some premises are considering providing takeaway and delivery services, and they may also require variations to licenses if conditions prohibit them. There may be changes of staff, designated premises supervisor, and you may be seeking relaxation of conditions or indeed tables and chairs licenses to allow outdoor drinking. Landlords are applying for what's known as shadow licenses, and that's a duplicate license that duplicates their tenant's license and therefore protects their assets. Some operators are selling their businesses, and you require a transfer of the license. Those, sadly, becoming insolvent can keep their license alive if there is an application for an interim authority notice. And if you want a pop-up premises to sell your gin, you can apply for a temporary event license, or temporary event notice 10, that will permit that. In addition, there may be staff who are training to be authorised to sell alcohol, and that requires personal licence applications. There is, of course, an important public health element to this, and it was beautifully summarised in a letter to the Irish Times last month in April. Pub closures, it says. Sir, for God's sake, open the pubs again before we all become alcoholics. Yours, etc., Tom McGrath from Wicklow. Amen to that. Now, in order to keep the licensing processes going, the Institute of Licensing, which is the primary body representing practitioners on all sides in alcohol licensing, the trade, the police forces, the local authorities, and so on. And the Institute of Licensing, and I immediately declare an interest as their vice chairman, has been producing a protocol designed to keep the licensing processes going. It's regularly updated. Update 4 was published on the 28th of April, and there is a link on screen now. There's a lot more detail in there than I'm able to go into. I thoroughly commend it to you. What does it say? Well, what it says that will be of most interest to you is as follows. Firstly, local authorities to take a considered and pragmatic approach to breaches of licence conditions if they're caused as a result of the pandemic. This was supported by a ministerial letter from Kit Malthouse MP on the 8th of April to similar effect. Licence fees. You have to pay an annual licence fee if you hold a licence. In certain areas there is a nighttime tax, otherwise known as the late night levy, and plenty of councils are preparing and prepared to put that off because they recognise the importance of their licence industry to their local economies. The licence applications must still be processed. What happens if there's an objection? If there's no objection to your licence application, it will be granted automatically without any hearing at all. But if there is an objection, then it goes to a hearing. How do we have hearings at the time of lockdown? Well, the answer is remote hearings, and councils are now increasingly holding Zoom, MS Teams, Google Meet meetings by video conference, and they can be effective. So the overall message here is there are opportunities for you if you wish to sell alcohol by retail, and the licensing processes are up and ready to deal with your application. I wish you all a lot of luck.